Okay, well, what I was going to do today was to give you an overview of what the referendum wording is about. We've analysed the wording and we think it's very strong and deals with some of the critical problems in the Constitution that we've been lobbying for since 1995. I also want to talk to you about our campaign for a yes vote and to seek your support to stand with us and to campaign for a yes vote in this referendum. We can't take it for granted that we'll get a yes vote or we'll get a high turnout, and we'd be really concerned that we don't get a yes vote and we don't get a high turnout. We have a strong and ambitious agenda for law reform in this country and policy reform, and the best way to keep that going is to have a strong statement from the people that children matter and families matter, and this referendum gives us an opportunity to do that. In terms of the referendum bill itself, we've been busy working on this in the last couple of weeks. Our analysis has been developed by two members of our legal and policy team, Adele and Maria. And I have to say we've received tremendous feedback from Alliance members. We had a working group of members who were very interested in the bill and gave us some great insights on the bill as well. We also sought senior counsel advice as well. We thought it was important to really understand the implications of how this is going to play out at the bar, and we also consulted with a range of different legal practitioners. And effectively what our analysis does is it does look at how it does implement the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is effectively our mandate. It's why we were established, it's why we're all committed to children's rights, but it also looks at the constitutional amendments that was put forward by the Oireachtas Joint Committee from 2010 that was chaired by Mayor O'Rourke. So in terms of the amendment itself and what it does, it's going to repeal Article 42(5) of the Constitution. And what that says is, in exceptional cases where the parents for physical or moral reasons fail in their duty towards their children, the state, as guardian of the common good, by appropriate means shall endeavour to supply the place of parents, but always with due regard for the natural and imprescriptible rights of the child. This is one of the only references to children in the Constitution. It's only a second express reference to children. And as you can see, the language is a bit outdated. It talks about moral and physical reasons, and it focuses on the failings of the parents. So this section is going to be replaced by a new section on children that has 5 sections. Now, from our perspective, we think this is a landmark achievement because it's taken a long time to get here. There's been 17 official reports documenting how this country over the last number of years, last 50 years, has failed children in different ways, particularly our most marginalised and vulnerable children, and particularly by institutions as well. We've also had an Oireachtas committee that met for a 3-year period. We've had several different versions of this wording. So it is a landmark achievement to be able to publish a bill and get widespread support from political parties and from people across the political divide. From our perspective, we think it's a pretty fair and balanced approach to the referendum, and it's certainly our best shot, we think, of winning a referendum. We also think it's going to lead to a more child-centred approach in our child protection system and our family law system, and that's a major step for us. And we also think it's going to lead to more child-centred decisions, because as many of you know, one of the problems in the courts is that decisions, critical decisions about the interests of children, often the child has been marginal in those decisions, and we think this referendum is going to address that critical issue. And we also think it does incorporate child-specific rights into the Constitution. That's where the gap is. Of course, children have all the same rights as all of us in the Constitution, but they do have a different experience of the world. They are reliant on adults, mostly for their care and welfare and for decisions to be made about them. And children's rights, child-specific rights, addresses that situation. So in terms of the first section of the amendment, it says the state recognises and affirms the natural and imprescriptible rights of all children and shall, as far as practicable, by its laws protect and vindicate those rights. So looking at the practical effects of that amendment, well, it applies to all children. That's very positive. Could have been restricted to citizens. We're very pleased about that. And we also think it provides a better balance with the rights of the family, because it uses the language natural and imprescriptible, which is used elsewhere in the Constitution. It'll also lead, we hope, to the identification of rights by our courts on a case-by-case basis. And that can be very useful. Having an overall statement like this will mean that the courts and the Constitution, which is a living document, can evolve over time to take account of the different and critical issues affecting children and families in Ireland. So it's very positive from that perspective. And we think it's going to be a signpost for the courts. And certainly our senior counsel advice said this, they'd be extremely surprised if the courts didn't use this as a signpost to start identifying rights for children, and particularly that the Irish people themselves have come out and supported this. That's why it's incredibly important. But it's also going to be a signpost to other decision makers who are making critical decisions every day about the care and welfare of children. It's reminding them that children have rights and that they have to take account of those rights as well. And we also think it's going to potentially strengthen the other rights and other laws affecting children. So if you look at education rights for children, most of which are in the Education Act of 1988, that can be read now with the Constitution, and it should strengthen rights in that area. In terms of what it doesn't do, it doesn't deal with some of the underlying problems in the Constitution, particularly in the equality area. As many of you know, our Constitution does provide that equality before the law, but it really only deals with blatant discrimination. And it's not only an issue affecting children, it affects all of us as citizens in the state. And we're hoping that this can be addressed in the Constitutional Convention. As the Minister said, it does not directly incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, contrary to what's been said. And there's no guarantee that the courts will use the convention when they identify rights, but we hope that it will provide some sort of basis to guide the courts going forward. It's a great source of best practice for children. It covers children's age developmental rights and age-appropriate rights, so it's a very important guide for those of us that work with children on an ongoing basis. There are some areas where it differs slightly from the Joint Committee's wording, but we think those issues can be dealt with through ordinary legislation. And we think that really this is the best time to do that. We have a Minister with full Cabinet status for Children and Youth Affairs. It's a great moment for us. We're at a tipping point. We have acceptance that we failed children for far too long. We've left them out in the cold. This is a great opportunity to look across the spectrum to see how we can protect children and family better in our laws. In terms of the second section, it deals with our child protection system. And what it says is, in exceptional cases where the parents, regardless of their marital status, fail in their duty towards their children to such an extent that the safety or welfare of any of their children is likely to be prejudicially affected, the state, as guardian of the common good, shall, by proportionate means, as provided by law, endeavour to supply the place of parents, but always with due regard to the natural and imprescriptible rights of the child. As I mentioned, this is effectively the foundation of our child protection system. And what it does, it actually balances very well the child's rights in this area. A child has a right to grow up with their family. And in fact, in the past, if you looked at the Ryan report, which looked at how, which is more commonly known as the Commission report on abuse against children, it found that children were actually removed from their families in the 50s and 60s, from their families because they were poor, and placed in industrial institutions. They were taken away because their mother had died and a widower wasn't allowed to care for the children, or they were taken away because a mother was unmarried. That's a major breach of their right to grow up with their family. And so it's always very important to remember you have to have safeguards, and you have to have a strong protection of the family in the Constitution, and you have to have the legislation and supports to support families. There's no doubt about that, and that's one of the things the state has to balance. But alongside that, you also have to protect children from abuse. Sometimes families can be dangerous, and we know that. And I think if you look at the child deaths report, most of the children that die of unnatural causes in that report were actually in their family homes. That's what actually happened. And if you read some of those cases, it's very clear that perhaps some of those children should not have been there. Their death could have been prevented if there had been an earlier intervention. So it's very important that the state gets this balance right. And we think that this wording does get that balance right. It also modernises the constitutional language in this area and brings it more into line with the language in the Childcare Act of 1991, which is effectively the basis for how our childcare system operates. The other thing that we think it does, and the Minister has already mentioned this, it focuses more on children. It doesn't just focus on the failings of the parents, and it brings more clarity to how children should be protected by focusing on the safety and welfare of children. That's what it's saying. It's a very important statement. It's basically shifting the focus of the child protection system to put children back at the heart of it. And of course we know that has been one of the problems in the past. It's why we need legislation obliging people working with children to report incidents of child abuse. It's to make sure the interests of institutions are not put before the interests of children. It's bringing children back to the centre. But it also has really important safeguards to protect families as well. Using the terms exceptional cases and proportionate means this cannot be a charter to separate families. It absolutely cannot be. These are critical safeguards that will make sure that any decision to intervene in the family is done in a proportionate manner. In terms of adoption then and a second chance at family life, many of you will know that we have a serious problem where there's up to 2,000 children at the moment in long-term foster care, and that's what they've been there for 5 years or more who cannot be adopted, even if their parents are married and they want to give their consent. And what we need is we need a provision in the Constitution to enable the Oireachtas to address that situation. Can you imagine? It's very difficult for children and families who've been caring for a child for nearly their whole life, and there's no prospect of that child being returned to their biological family. And even in those cases, some of those biological families want the child to be adopted by the foster carer, and it's still not possible. And what this referendum will do is it'll actually make it possible for those children to be adopted, and it includes important safeguards as well in legislation that the Minister has already mentioned for how those adoptions might take place. But I have to say, not all of those 2,000 children want to be adopted. Many of them are being fostered by aunts and uncles and are happy to be in that situation. So it's important to remember that as well. In terms of the next section I wanted to talk about was the best interests of the child in care and family law proceedings. Provision 4.1 says a provision shall be made by law that in all the resolution of all proceedings brought by the state as guardian of the common good for the purposes of preventing the safety and welfare of any child from being prejudicially affected, or concerning the adoption and guardianship or custody of or access to any child, the best interests of the child shall be the paramount consideration. So looking at the practical effect of this, it basically provides for the Oireachtas to legislate to ensure the best interests will be the decision-making basis for judges in legal proceedings in these specific areas. And it's an unusual approach because normally, I suppose, with the Constitution, it's up to the judges to work out the parameters of how a right might play out in practice. So what this will do is it'll put the Oireachtas in that seat and force the Oireachtas to legislate to make sure these areas are covered. And when we talk to our senior counsel about what this means in practice, because this is, of course, they'll be the main people who will be using this in the courts. And effectively what he said is, in his view, it's an irreducible set of rights. It means that the future governments will have to legislate in this area and cannot repeal this legislation. Otherwise, you could take a case against them. So we think that's a very positive development, and it's something we'd like to see expanded upon. In terms of the voice of the child then, the second provision says, provision shall be made by law for securing, as far as practicable, that all proceedings referred to in subsection 1, so the one I just mentioned, in respect of any child who is capable of forming his or own views, the child shall be ascertained, the views of the child shall be ascertained and given due weight, having regard to the age and maturity of the child. Now this is a very positive development because, as many of you know, there's been a major gap with how we take account of the views of the child. The Ryan report, again, for me, is one of the main indicators of that. The children that I mentioned that were taken away and placed in industrial institutions, they were neglected, they were starved, they were abused, and when they tried to complain, no one listened to them. So it's very critical that we have a provision like this in law to protect children. You need to empower children to protect themselves, and the best way to do that is to give them the power to say stop and to tell someone in authority that something is happening to them. So this is a very important development, and we hope it leads to a culture change with how we deal with vulnerable and marginalised children. It's also important to remember it doesn't mean that the view of the child is going to determine the outcome of a decision. It's just one of the factors that a judge will have to take account of, together with all the other factors in a case. It doesn't mean a child has to express a view that they have the responsibility to do that either, because some children won't want to do that. So it's important towards a kind of a flexible approach, and it's a procedural guideline to help us make better decisions for children. So what the amendment will do is it will oblige the Oireachtas to legislate to ensure the views of children are taken into account by judges in care and family law proceedings. So access, custody, guardianship, etc. So that could be very important, and certainly it's an area where there's a gap and some work will have to be done. But it could have a major impact on our family law area. I really think it will. Talking to family law practitioners, they say this is very important for them, because for the most part, family law courts are pretty bitter and divisive places. And bitter devices about access and custody, often the child is really at the margins of that decision. So that will force them to think about the child. It'll bring the child back into focus. And giving a child the possibility to express their view about a situation could be very positive, particularly for unmarried fathers, where we know there are some issues at the moment. So again, this is a positive development. It's also worth mentioning that the wording here is quite close to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I think that's very positive development. You can see throughout the wording different elements of the Convention are there. It's used as a guide, but of course the Convention is not incorporated through the Constitution. I'll give you all an opportunity to ask me questions about our perspective on the wording, but I did want to talk first off about our campaign and get your views on that as well. As we know, at this point in time, we've got broad consensus for this wording. I think it was really fantastic that Archbishop Dermot Martin came out in support of the wording very recently. And I think it shows the care that has gone into getting this wording right, the fact that the broad mainstream influencers and organisations support this wording. But I also think we can't be complacent. We need debate. I'm not saying we need a very divisive debate, but you look at the Oireachtas Inquiry's debate, and many people voted no because they didn't understand what the amendment was about. So we really have to get information out there to explain what the referendum is about and what it's not about. We also need information in different forms, in different formats. That could be in written format, could be in Irish, could be in different languages, could be through social media. We have to be, I think, inventive about the kind of things that we put out there. Bernardo's has done a very interesting infographic. It has 5 reasons to vote yes. I think those kind of ideas are really welcome and important. And we also need to get out and vote ourselves. And we need to get everyone else we know to get out and vote as well. I think that's going to be absolutely critical. Sinn Féin are really good at doing that. They bring in buses. So we really need to think about some inventive ideas about how we get people out to vote for this referendum. I do think a no vote or a low turnout is going to weaken our cause. If we have a high turnout from the public, it's certainly going to bolster the Minister's position at Cabinet to bring forward more reforms. It'll be a real signpost to our mainstream political parties that children matter, and we want to keep this reform agenda going. In terms of our campaign, you've been involved in a lot of these activities. Up till now, we've formed a working group of our members. We've been inspiring each other on an ongoing basis, exchanging information. We've been doing briefings for members. We've also done some media training for members as well. Many of you have done a fantastic job. We hear really great reports, so we're really looking forward to seeing you out there on the airwaves. And we've also produced a range of explanatory documents. You'll see today we've got several different documents outside. One is a campaign toolkit for you to go out and campaign in this referendum, some ideas for campaigning. One is an analysis of the bill, and one is a background document to this referendum campaign as well. So my colleagues in the Legal and Policy team have been working very busily to get these documents out to you, and we also have a summary of the wording which we're going to have translated into Irish. 150 connectors, trying to work with organisations who have big multipliers, access to lots of voters, and who are very influential, and we've done briefings briefings and meetings with them as well. And we've been also trying to get opinion pieces out, particularly going for tabloid media, more popular media, and out to different alternative media outputs as well. And we've been trying to get to local and national radio. In terms of this campaign, we're working as part of Yes for Children with Bernardo's, ISPCC and Campaign for Children, because we want to pool our resources to get the best possible outcome for this campaign. We've all been working on this for years. We're very excited about it. We've lots of ideas, but we really think it's important to work together to run a very exciting campaign that gets to touch all aspects of Irish society. And I suppose we're calling on all of you to join us in that campaign. We're meeting every Saturday at the moment in the Alexander Hotel. We hope you can join us in that. And we're trying to coordinate our activities so we're as impactful as possible, and we coordinate and complement each other as much as possible. You have seen our national poster campaign. Those posters have gone up. We like to believe we have one of the best posters among the bunch. Some of you might disagree, but certainly a lot of work went into getting those posters out there. And our slogan is "Protecting Childhood Starts Here." I like it because it doesn't just talk about child protection, it talks about the values underlying this referendum, which is about recognising and protecting childhood. We also have a website, which I'm going to move on to as well, and we have merchandise. And the idea, I suppose, with the merchandise is to assist you in the campaign as well. We want to be able to share that merchandise with you so you can disseminate it and use it to run your own Yes for Children events as well. And we're also coordinating our media activities. This is the website for the campaign. And our other main activity is a national bus tour that has already launched on Monday, and it's going to over 40 locations throughout the country. And we're trying to bring the message to as many people as possible, and there's been a tremendous response from the public, I have to say, to the bus tour. Many members of the Children's Rights Alliance team are going to be on it. Many member organisations, you've been really fantastically engaged. We even have board members who are going on it. Our chair wants to go on the bus as well. So
I don't want to go.
You do want to go. You rang us up and said you want to go. You're going to have to stay in the hostel though. That's the only thing. So it's been really tremendous, and particularly the response from the local media has been very positive as well. In terms of the next step in the campaign, I mentioned we cannot be complacent. We need to get out and vote, and that's where we're moving to next. We're working as Yes for Children to do that. We're going to give you weekly updates about the campaign. We're going to give you updates about what media has happened over the week, what events has happened over the week, and we're also going to do a poster and leaflet that's going to basically give you the reasons to vote yes, but also give you guidance on how to get other people to vote yes as well. We're also going to try different forms of media. As I mentioned, we have lots of our members who are media trained at the moment. We're going to do 1-minute snapshots with them about why they're supporting the referenda, and we're going to put that out onto websites that has really high traffic usage, and that's going to be launched, and they're going to be launched on an ongoing basis as well. I mentioned we have merchandise for members, but also you have the possibility of putting a link to the Yes for Children website on your website. The National Youth Council has done that. It's just a button, it's very simple. But also we suggest you could put Yes for Children in your email signature. It's amazing the amount of emails we send every day to different people, but it's a great way to get the message out to someone without even having to talk to them about it. We're going to be doing a whole range of different briefings as well over the next couple of weeks, but we also want to support you as member organisations to organise your own events. You have access to a huge and tremendous number of voters. You yourselves are very persuasive. You've been working in this area for a very long time. So it's critically important that you are seen visibly supporting this referendum campaign. I suppose just to conclude, we can't take away what happened to children in industrial and religious institutions in Ireland, and we can't protect children from abuse in all situations. But we do think we can draw a line in the sand to ensure that our Constitution, at the very least, offers the best protection to children. I think Saturday the 10th of November gives us a chance with the people of Ireland. It gives us a chance to ensure the Constitution reflects our values as a people, because I do believe the people of Ireland value childhood, and unfortunately those values have not been reflected in our Constitution and our laws. It gives us a chance to ensure that children are properly protected, This is only a building block, though. It's important to remember that. And the other reforms that are taking place, the new Child and Family Support Agency, Children First being put on a statutory footing, all of these measures together are going to make Ireland a safer place for children. And it's also a chance to ensure that families, who are the main advocates for children, that's what we know. They're the main advocates, the main people that complain to the Ombudsman for Children when their children can't get access to services. They're the main group that contact us on an ongoing basis when there's an issue affecting their child. We think it gives them the best possible support to raise their children in a safe environment. This referendum, we think, will make sure that children are respected and protected and heard. And we'd hope that you would stand together with us to get that message out and to campaign for a tremendous yes vote. Thank you.